Hi there. Welcome to the Adam Ruins Everything podcast. I'm your host, Adam Conover. This is the podcast offshoot of our True TV show, Adam Ruins Everything. First of all, for everyone who's asking, yes, the show is coming back. We're doing all new episodes starting August 23rd. You can catch them then on True TV. It's going to be so much fun. And you can find full clips and full episodes at truetv.com/Adam Ruins Everything and the Watch True TV app. Okay, so you might be asking yourself, I know what the TV show is. What is this Adam Ruins Everything podcast? Let me explain. On the show, we have incredible expert guests on every week who, unfortunately, I only get to talk to for like 2 minutes on the show. But I had so much fun chatting with them on set when the cameras weren't rolling. I was like, I want to talk to these people for longer. So that's what we're going to be doing on the show. We're going to be talking to the incredible expert guests that we had on the show in a longer format about their work, about the ideas contained in their work, about the ideas that we talk about on the show. And heck, we might end up talking to a couple comedians who've been on the show as well. But for most of the time, it's going to be all expert all the time. It'll be a lot of fun. So my very first guest on the podcast is Seleta Reynolds, who's the general manager of the LA Department of Transportation. And I'm really, really excited to talk to her because here's the thing. I personally think if you've seen the Cars episode, which she appeared on, you probably know that I think car culture is craziness. It's an insane transportation system that we've saddled ourselves with that has so many downsides environmentally, just in terms of what it does to our cities, in terms of how expensive it is, how hard it is to get around. And the cool thing is that LA, this centerpiece of car culture in America, is in fact making huge strides to change this by adding public transportation, by taking out lanes and turning them into bike lanes or public plazas. They're really doing incredible things, and Seleta Reynolds is one of the people making that happen and turning LA from, the epicenter of Carmageddon into a model for the nation. So I'm so excited to talk to her about how she's doing that and all the great things LA is doing. So here it is. Hey, Seleta, thank you so much for being here. I know you as a spokesperson of DOT, but what do you do day to day? It seems like such a huge thing to be responsible for transportation in Los Angeles, How does one impact that on a daily basis?
Mostly I just hang out, Adam. I
Really?
just drink coffee and just kick it in my office. There's really not a lot to do. No, it's a good question. It's a good question because here's something else about departments of transportation in different cities. Mm-hmm. They are not all the same because some cities don't even have a department of transportation. Like City of Oakland, California, has not had a Department of Transportation, is just in the process of trying to create one.
The whole city had no Department of Transportation?
Correct.
That's so bizarre. Who was in charge of transportation?
The Public Works Agency.
Oh, okay.
Right? And so then, and there are a lot of cities in California like that, and so then the people who run the Public Works agencies, they tend to be people who come from big infrastructure backgrounds. So they might be, their expertise is in sewers, or their expertise is in, bridges, or their expertise is in kind of the big deal city making, guts of the city kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And transportation might be just a little nook inside of a giant public works agency.
So it's almost like an engineering problem to them on that, if they're thinking about it on that level.
That's exactly what it is.
Where they're just like, okay, I build a highway, this many cars, it holds up all the cars. That's all I got to do is make a thing where the cars don't literally fall over.
Yeah.
And,
About maybe 20 years or so ago, the state of California started giving money to you as a city if you had a bicycle master plan. So all of a sudden, and if you had a bicycle coordinator, and so all of a sudden all these cities, they were looking around thinking, yeah, all right, well, let's get a bike person then. And usually that person came from they were tucked away in some other weird nook in the bureaucracy. They were like the person who writes the poetry that goes on the bus or something, right? Because they were this is totally and 1,000% true based on real people, my real first bosses. But
it absolutely is. You're just making me remember that in New York City on the subways there's subway poetry, and you're making me flash the fact that somewhere there's a bureaucrat picking the poetry.
Yes.
Okay, it needs to be transit-related poetry, but we'd love to have a woman. Or they're trying to figure out the.
Yeah, this one feels political over here. This feels like she's trying to do a race thing. I'm not into it. This one's about flowers. Let's pick that one. Go. Yeah, no, totally. And they really were, or they were.
And they become the bike person.
The bike person, or they were hippies who had become, traffic engineers, and then they got to go do this weird thing, which was only a weird thing, and because this money was available. But what they didn't understand, what I don't think bureaucracies understood was happening, was that they were creating this kind of revolution inside departments. So you have people who have been fighting and fighting and fighting to get those guys who were sort of, and I'm sure there were women as well, who just want to, let's build the road and here's how. And now you have somebody coming online saying, well, I went out and got all this money for you to build these bike lanes, but because we're in a big city, we're not widening the road, so those lanes that you adore so much, I'm going to need to repurpose. I'm just going to need to borrow one of those to make it into a bike lane. And that's where you had this massive clash. So this all started because you asked me what I do every day. So really, this is a very roundabout way of saying that departments of transportation grew up organically out of a whole bunch of different outside forces that you don't necessarily see.
So real quick, you do this. Give me a real quick bullet point.
So on-street and off-street parking, right? I actually own 129 properties in the city of Los Angeles, and most of them are surface lots.
Not personally, the DOT does.
The Department
You're not
of
saying that you're a parking lot queen personally.
No.
Okay.
Well, some of them are just vacant. I mean, there's just parcels that the Department of Transportation owns.
Wow, okay.
So we regulate all the metered parking and set the prices and do all those kinds of things. I have a giant paint and sign shop and a signal shop. So we've got about 200 kind of skilled trades workers who do, who fix the signals, who put the stripes on the street, who put the signs on the street.
Got it.
I operate a transit system, which is sort of unique for Department of Transportation. So it's the second largest one in LA County, which is like saying that Fanta is the second largest soft drink after Coke, but I'll take the silver.
Like the buses and the
Dash and Commuter Express buses, and we have about 26 million rides a year, so it's actually nothing to sneeze at. It's a pretty big system. And then I have parking officers, traffic officers, so the direct traffic, they write tickets. That's actually one of the largest parts of the organization. There's close to 600 people, including crossing guards, that do that work.
So when I drive home I live near Dodger Stadium, and so on a game night, it's your people who are directing the traffic and getting all those people out of there and changing the signals and all that stuff.
LADOT.
Got it.
And then I also regulate all the franchises in the city. So that means taxis, because taxis are regulated by franchise in the city of Los Angeles. It also means non-emergency medical transport. And then, weirdly, in the weirdest twist of all, it also means pipeline franchises. So that includes gas, oil, and electricity that runs in pipelines underneath the city of Los Angeles.
Wait. You are in charge of the gas and oil pipelines too?
Well, I regulate the franchise. So it's sort of like a landlord-tenant relationship. The companies have to sort of write us a check, and we have to it's nuts.
That is a huge bundle of responsibility.
Super nuts. And then there's all the engineers, right? So there's the active transportation program, there's Vision Zero, there's shared mobility, there's bike share, there's car share, there's all of those things as well. So
here's the thing I'm curious about. Is it kind of seems like every city in the country, to take this bigger than LA for a second, every city I go to, it's almost, it reminds me of food trucks. You know how every city you go to, they're like, we're really into food trucks here, and you can tell it's a countrywide trend. Also, every city I go to, they're like, we just added a bunch of bike lanes and a bike share, and we're working on light rail, and like we're
streetcar. Don't forget about a streetcar.
Oh yeah,
they're all working on streetcars, including Los Angeles.
Really, LA's working on streetcars.
It is. Yes.
Oh, where's that going to be?
Downtown.
Oh,
on Broadway.
Oh man, I love streetcars. They're so cool. It's like
that's why that right there. That is why it is red meat that no politician can refuse, because it captures people's imaginations in a way that other things don't.
It's certainly in a way a bus doesn't, and a subway. I mean, I love subways, but a lot of people don't. But a streetcar is like so romantic, right? It seems like almost every big city is like waging that battle. In my view, I'm sure there's plenty that aren't, but it seems like it.
Well, I think that what you're observing is this kind of trend that's actually been kind of building for a long period of time. They began to, first of all, the air quality management boards and the feds began to fund this stuff, which meant that if you wanted to get a hold of that money, you had to go out and do some actual planning work.
Got it.
So this was all kind of going on,
So
but it was
the government's seeding a little money, and that makes it like it's federal money makes these little departments blossom, kind of.
Yes, and there was a guy, his name is John Forrester, and he started this movement called vehicular cycling, which pushed really hard for bicyclists to be treated as traffic, because he felt very strongly that the safest way for a person on a bicycle to behave was to behave as though they were a car. So that really dictated the way we wrote the rule books in the United States for 50 years. That's why,
And that was a mistake in your view?
the bike is a means to an end of really great cities, and not just in the United States, but in the world, right? It's not really about the bike. It's about creating a city where it's easy and safe for people to get around, to work, exercise into their daily life, et cetera, et cetera. But the big sort of misfire on the vehicular cycling piece was that approach, putting, person on a bike next to, a 4-inch white line and fast moving traffic was only enough to attract like the most fit, the most aggressive, the smallest percentage of people.
The bike enthusiasts who are like the weird guy who shows up to work like in his biking shorts and he doesn't care, he's stinky all day and because he's a triathlete and that it's only attracting that person.
We call them mammals, which stands for middle-aged men in Lycra.
That's amazing. Mammals?
Yes. And bless them because they were fighting the good fight to try and claim some road space. But, I'd very early in my career, one of the first projects I worked on was in the street called Telegraph Avenue in Oakland. And, I just remember showing up to community meetings and you'd have these sort of normal people who were showing up to try and understand why, some idiot came up with this plan to put a bike lane down this street and dressed in normal clothing. And then there'd be all these guys in saggy Lycra and I'd just be like, oh, yeah. And these are my champions. Have to figure out a way to normalize it. So that's what you're seeing now is this evolution towards more protected bikeways, which actually makes it even harder because it requires more space. But there's a huge battle in California and in the nation, but really nowhere was it more intense than in California, between the vehicular cyclists and this movement to provide these bikeways that were going to attract a much broader range of cyclists, especially women, because it just ran totally counter to the whole philosophy that bikes should behave as traffic.
It's like an ideology about bikes that bikes should, and I mean I think that way sometimes, where like if I'm on a bike, which I have not had a bike in LA, but I remember when I tried in New York, I'd be like, I'm a car too. Like I get to be in the lane. You sort of adopt that.
I am traffic.
Yeah, I am traffic, but you're not really when you're a bike. Is that
what
you say?
I would say that that kind of mindset isn't. It's difficult for people, especially if they haven't ridden in a while, to get to that point, right? Especially, I mean, men outnumber women about 3-to-1 on bikes in cities.
Wow.
And we know from a lot of research we've done on these protected bike lanes across the U.S. that they do attract more women. They do attract more sort of women who might have a car, might have their kids, on an extra cycle in the back. And they even attract more casual bicyclists.
It seems like the built environment of the city still gets in the way of people using those new options, right? Like I live in Echo Park and, I'm like, oh my God, great. An expo line and buses and all these other things. Oh, I would love to use them. I live at the top of a hill though, like I live a mile from any of those things. And so while I'm very happy that they exist, I still end up, driving, even though I'm like the biggest, person rooting for public transit, but I end up not using it because it still feels like that barrier is high. Is that a challenge that you guys are facing? Or
well, how did you pick where you lived?
It was where my girlfriend's brother lived, so we moved in with him in Echo Park. He had just,
so it was like pure necessity, right?
We moved here and it was absolute necessity, and it was also very much. I mean, this is dumb, but I lived in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, which is sort of where people in their late 20s who are working in the arts parts live, and I was like, which neighborhood is the place where people in their late 20s, early 30s live in LA? Looks like it's Echo Park, so I moved there. And that was the most thought I put into it.
So two things. Thing one is Los Angeles a hugely challenging retrofit for mobility? Let's call them broadly transportation options, right? And here we're talking about, buses, subways, biking. We're talking about Lyft and Uber and taxis and, eventually car share and bike share and all those things. Absolutely it is. But it is also a city that has these streets that are just tremendously wide. So it's got a really broad sort of right of way. Yeah. I would say canvas, but it's like these big rights of way that are just crying out to be reorganized and rationalized for the way people get around now, because not everybody rides a bike, and in particular in Echo Park in your neighborhood and the neighborhoods that ring downtown, about a third of people don't have access to a car. So we know there's actually a huge population out there that depends on these other modes of transportation as a lifeline, and there's also probably a lot of people like you who don't really want to drive every time they want to leave their home. They want to have, a more mellow, be able to ride a bike and to date night with your girlfriend or whatever it is, or maybe you don't want to drive downtown because parking is going to be a hassle and you want some other way to do that trip. Not for every single one, but probably a couple times a week you wish you didn't have to drive all the time, right? And so figuring out how to take a city that was built around the car and retrofit it for all these other options is something that's really meaningful and valuable because it has so many applications to other cities across the United States. If we can do it in Los Angeles, then Houston can do it, and Dallas can do it, and Cincinnati can do it, and St. Louis can do it, and all those other cities. So I think that what gets people down is they start thinking about, and this is sort of old school kind of planning or bike planning is, well, we have to do these really long routes so that people can get out of their cars and use their bikes to commute. And that just is not the way that this is going to happen. It's going to happen by me looking at things at a neighborhood scale and making it really easy for you to bike or walk or use other modes for all the short trips that you make.
Yeah.
And I will wager that probably most of the trips you make are under 3 miles or under 5 miles.
Under 5 miles, yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
Say about half of them, right? And so figuring out a way to sort of do that at a neighborhood scale is not something that people have spent a lot of time investing in and thinking about yet.
So it's really like a patchwork of all the different ways that people might want to get around. It's so funny because you always hear about people make assumptions about how other people get around. I actually spent about 3 months in LA about 5 years ago because I was working one job and I didn't know how to drive then, right? I was staying at a place in I crash landed in LA. It was my very first comedy writing job. I crash landed at a place in North Hollywood. Actually, no. At first, I started in Hollywood, and then I was commuting to North Hollywood.
It's a metro line up there.
Exactly. I did that because I could take the metro line, and I bought a bike, and I would bike to the metro line, and I would take my bike on the metro, and I would get off, and I would bike again, which was difficult because I was hauling a bike up and down stairs, and it was very hot, and people would literally be shocked to see me. And they'd be like, "How did you bike? What, you biked here? I don't know anyone who bikes." Or I'd take the bus, and they'd be like, "Oh, no one takes the bus." Or they'd be, "You took the metro? What? I've lived here 10 years. No one takes the metro." And it's weird because people say like, "Oh, the buses are terrible. I hate the bus. I never take it." But maybe they should say like, well, if the bus is terrible, that must be awful for all the people who need to take the bus.
Right.
We should improve the bus then because like what about the poor, person who works in the same building as you but can't afford a car and is like stuck with a commute that could be better if we improved it. Does that make sense?
Well, I think you can see it in just the giant market share that Uber and Lyft have captured in Los Angeles.
Yes.
It's like, I would hear these myths about LA. Oh, it's car capital and everybody loves to drive. And what I found when I got here is that nobody really loves to drive because the traffic is miserable and it's not that enjoyable to be in your car and it feels like a grind. And all of those things are backed up by science. People who have long commutes, they have shorter lives. They are less happy. I mean, the happiest commuters are the ones who walk to work.
I read once that New New York had one of the longest average commutes, but people rated themselves as being happiest with their commutes because they could read and sit. Like everyone's like, "Oh, I hate the subway," but in reality, people can like read a magazine or sort of be in their own world. They don't. Because they don't have a job.
Yeah.
When you're on the subway, you don't have to make sure you don't kill anybody.
Right. And it's called found time. There's a word for it.
Oh, yeah.
Where, all of a sudden I'm on the train or I'm on the bus and I can listen to a podcast, or I can read the book I'm reading, or I can just people watch, which is also
wonderful.
one of the that's one of the reasons why people founded cities to begin with, is because we like to be around each other. We like to observe each other. And when you're in your car, you lose that, and what you gain is sort of the sense of anonymous groupthink where, you're kind of isolated and all the things that you were articulating earlier. So, I think that what people are signaling when Uber and Lyft capture a huge market share, or when, we open up a new bikeway and it's, that we double or triple the number of people who are using it overnight, is that people are ahead of the politics and the policies and the way we're not providing for them what they want. And so it's incumbent upon us to invest in all of the modes.
Yes.
And the ones that have had sort of decades of disinvestment are all the ones that we're talking about.
Well, we're going to take a really quick break. We'll be right back talking to Seleta Reynolds from the LA DOT.
Baby geniuses.
Hi, I'm Lisa Hannawalt.
And I'm Emily Heller. And if you're not listening to our podcast, Baby Geniuses, you're missing out on stuff like
Kumail Nanjiani solving the Zodiac murders.
Who's like, would you ever go to a friend and you're like, hey, could you lick all these envelopes for me? You'd be like, you're a serial killer. I'm leaving right now.
Guy Branum talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
And it was just a great moment of like, oh no, I'm here, boys. Like, I'm on this side of the bench.
Megan Amram talking about intimidating baristas.
Just feel like they're always in character. Like, they're always in character as, like, cool hipster girl. And I just want to break through that barrier.
Plus, every week we explore a new Wikipedia page and talk to a crazy expert in the field of nonsense.
Well, any hack can make you not have a boner. I mean, it's about how you do it.
Right.
And we're the only podcast with regular updates about Martha Stewart's pony or your money back.
We're not going to give them their money back, are we?
No.
Let's keep it.
Yeah.
Listen to our show every other Monday on Maximum Fun.
Yay!
Once again, this is Adam Ruins Everything, the podcast. I'm talking with Seleta Reynolds, the general manager of the LA Department of Transportation. So, Seleta, here's my question about Uber and Lyft. These services, despite all of their problems and all the concerns everyone has about them, have also revolutionized travel in Los Angeles. Like they've made Los Angeles, like frankly, 5 times as livable. It's so much easier to get around than it was before. And come to think of it, it seems like a service that the public sector should have been providing. The reason that gap was there and the private sector swooped in was the public sector wasn't filling that need. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, totally. And it happened because we totally failed to evolve public transit and taxis in a way that was rider focused, right? And that's why that giant gaping maw existed for those companies to fill. And everything that we do to regulate or to engage or to collaborate with them is sort of precedent setting for the arrival of connected and driverless vehicles, right? Because that's kind of where things are going next, and nobody has the magic crystal ball that can really predict with certainty what's going to happen. But I can tell you that it is going to grow out of what's happening with Uber and Lyft right now unless the public side gets to the table in a meaningful way. Because what the public sector does is make sure the city is served equitably.
Yes.
Right? And make sure that people who can benefit most from those services, either the very old and the very young, people with disabilities, people who don't have enough money to buy their own car, that those fares are affordable to them. There are questions around labor and sort of how that's all working, et cetera. So it was very interesting to watch what happened in Austin. Did you pay any attention to that?
I did. I believe what happened was that Austin wanted to background check the drivers more thoroughly, including a fingerprint, and Uber and Lyft, I assume, sort of got together and said, we're pulling out of the city entirely, right?
So the playbook is You show up in a city, you become so ubiquitous and popular that when insert politician's name here decides they want to come and regulate you, there's this public outcry because you've become so popular. And I don't think it's necessarily the right where we should be focusing, but where most politicians go is background checks and driver safety. So it happened in Portland. They did the same thing. They came into the city. They pulled out. People freaked out. But there, the mayor and the director of transportation were able to get those companies to the table and kind of come up with a more collaborative kind of pseudo-regulation. What happened in Austin is that the mayor and city council said, okay, we want to fingerprint your drivers. Uber and Lyft paid to put a ballot measure on the ballot to allow the people to vote because
air quotes.
They thought,
I just want to note, Seleta did some big air quotes around the people.
The people. So because they're super popular, right?
Yes.
And so, of course, they're going to crush that vote. Well, they didn't crush that vote. They lost that vote.
Wow.
And so then they had to make good on their promise that they were going to leave town if they lost that vote. So what's happening in Austin is pretty fascinating. First of all, I hope somebody is paying attention to what's going on with bike share transit and traffic because that's a city where they were very well established and now they're gone. So what were their that's the big question in
So what are
cities is
people
what
gonna
kind
do
of
instead?
impacts? What kind of impacts are these services having? Are they creating more congestion? Are they taking trips off public transit? Are they taking bike walk trips?
Just from a research standpoint, it would be interesting. Yeah.
Right, because this is going to be, if it's precedent setting for the future of our cities, we need to understand what all of the kind of pros and cons are as we're making these decisions because, people tend to focus on it that it's like they're called transportation network companies, TNCs, TNC versus taxi argument. It's totally not. It's a TNC versus every other mode of transportation argument because they're taking trips off public transit. In Hollywood and in Los Angeles, they're taking trips that people would otherwise bike or walk.
Yeah.
So,
It's true.
especially particularly for millennials.
I've definitely done it where, I could walk or I could take an Uber and it'll be 5 minutes faster or whatever and I won't have to,
That is just mind blowing.
No, I know.
To
I
me.
try. No, Seleta, I try to be good. No, I don't really do it that much. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The thing that bugs me most about the ride sharing is the idea where Lyft used to be the worst with this, where they'd be like, hey, it's not like a cab, it's just like your neighbor who's like taking you for a ride. You sit in the front,
Come
give
sit
him
in
a
the front
fist bump.
seat.
Yeah, and chat with him. It's like, no, I'm paying for a service, man. You're a cabbie. Just be a cabbie. That's all I want. I'm very glad that you don't need a license or whatever, That's fine. But I'm paying, just let me do my thing, and it's a little antisocial, but often you're stressed out. You're going to meet somebody or you're going to work or something like that.
Yeah, so I'm always like, hey, is it busy today? Like I get in and I'm like, okay, here we go. Guys, make some talk. Busy, how long you been driving? Oh, really? Is this what you do full time or are you just filling in the blanks? Okay, cool.
I had a driver ask me once, they asked me, their first question was like, so what kind of music do you like? Like, not because they wanted to change the radio. Like, they were just like we were on a first date, like in 8th grade. What kind of music?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, hip hop, anything but country, or whatever. Like, what kind of conversation?
Really, you got to shut that conversation down. You got to be like, you know what, Christian rock. Do you have any Striper, or do you have anything you can put on, like old Amy Grant?
So, is your goal to fill that gap that Uber and Lyft are currently filling by creating more forms of public transportation? Or
my goal is to get cities to the table in the conversation about taxi bots or robo-taxis or whatever we're going to call them because when cars showed up on the scene, we call them horseless carriages, and that they became something totally different, right?
Yeah.
So whatever you think right now about what Uber and Lyft are going to turn into. I mean, Lyft has this huge deal they did with General Motors where they're testing autonomous vehicles. Uber has their own R&D around autonomous vehicles. Every major manufacturer is doing that same thing. That cities are not at the table making sure that whatever our vision is for the future, whatever we want our cities to be, and I would argue, at a basic level, we want them to be places that are happy and thriving and strong and creative and
everyone would agree with that.
And also healthy and all of and affordable and equitable, whatever those things mean. And cities are not yet really engaging, and so it's concerning that we're sort of letting the private sector figure it out, right?
Yes.
And this is something I would hear from transportation people for the last 4 or 5 years. They'd be like, the robots are coming. There's that episode of The Simpsons where Homer's like, I, for one, welcome our new alien overlords, right? And it felt that way. It felt like people were saying, well, the market's going to figure it out. I'm like, the market's not going to figure it out.
Yeah.
We have to be at the table to make sure that we're trying things out, we're testing things out, we're taking risks, we're pushing boundaries, and we're trying to collaborate and partner with those private companies, but we're also trying to put our own product on the street, whether that is a municipally owned fleet of driverless vehicles that operates from a digital dispatch. I think it's really critical because if you envision a future where it's just all a bunch of, Swedish Volvo bots driving us around, we don't have enough curb space to accommodate that future.
Yeah.
Right? I don't have enough space as the Department of Transportation to be able to accommodate every single person in the city getting around in that way.
Well, and there's already so much. I mean, since working on our Cars episode, I've looked around the city more, in terms of, I will just look and think, look at how much space is devoted in any city, even in New York, to moving people around to the streets, and
then storing those things when they don't have people in them.
That's the craziest.
It's crazy.
The craziest part to me was, thinking about it with my comedy brain of sort of like, I'm an alien who's come to Earth looking at this for the first time. The fact that so much of my day is spent figuring out where to keep the 2-ton piece of metal that brought me to where I am, and that's my job, and that, you need to buy space to put it, and that everybody is doing this at once, and that could be used for people, could be using this space. We could be walking in it. We could build buildings there. We could have little, mini playgrounds or I don't know.
Protected bikeways.
Yeah, exactly. And once my eyes were open to that and I stopped taking it taking it for granted, it was shocking to me.
It's nuts, right? And it's, we don't really have a congestion problem. What we have is an efficiency problem because there's so much space in those vehicles being unused. It's just sitting there empty, right? You can look around and see on the freeway, and we also, I would argue.
It's that thing of like 40 cars, 50 cars worth of people is equal to like one subway car in terms of how many people are being moved.
Yeah, pull all the roofs off those cars and see how many more people you could be moving in that same right of way, because we have to live within our means. We're not going to deck those suckers. We're not going to widen the freeways.
Yes.
So we have to figure out a way to be more efficient with what we're given. And so that's really what my focus is.
Yeah, it's almost as though LA was built in this extremely low density way because it's like, oh, it's out west and we got so much space and everything will be so far apart and everyone gets their own single family home. And now it's like but so many people live here now that it's like, oh crap, like we actually built it so low density we can't fit all the people in who need space.
To. And you go out to some of these neighborhoods and you'll see, there's people packed into these single family homes, and then you go around the corner and there's an RV parked out back and somebody's living there. And so our poverty and our density in Los Angeles looks different than it does almost anywhere else because of the way the city was built. Having said that, in Koreatown and where we are around MacArthur Park, some of the densest places west of the Mississippi, as dense in Manhattan in some places, Koreatown is. So
really?
Yeah, we have tremendous density here, and our streets need to catch up.
Yeah.
So that, we sort of help people make these other choices, because the system we're giving them right now doesn't allow them any of those other choices.
So you mentioned autonomous cars, which I think is obviously, I feel like that's it's a hot topic, as they say. It's very, very, very sexy topic.
It is.
I'm kind of an autonomous car skeptic because I see everyone talks about them as though it's just around the corner and it like is a fait accompli and has already happened. Is it something that you're making plans for to deal with now, or is it an oversold dream?
Well, I think that you're observing two things. One is people are so desperate for a solution and they feel like this will get them there. And when you talk to the feds about it, or when you talk to those stodgy engineers that don't work at DOT, by the way, and my engineers are awesome, but those stodgy old school engineers who are sort of let's build the lanes super wide. They look at autonomous vehicles and they think about they're maximizing something called flow theory, which is like how many cars you can get through a given space, at a given time.
Right.
Because there's not going to be tailgating anymore because these things are going to be able to ride, inches away from each other.
Oh, yeah.
And, this is going to the sort of mythical maximum capacity of our American freeway system is finally going to be reached.
They'll go at 80 miles an hour, an inch away from each other, and it'll be a perfectly efficient robot car.
Giant platoon of robots.
And by the way, this is the bizarre thing about autonomous cars. When you describe that, people are like, yeah, everyone will have their own autonomous car. You get in, you get out, and then they'll be so close together, and there'll be so many of them. It's like you're describing a train.
Yeah, I know.
I know. It's a giant train.
It's a train.
It's a train. You wanted a train the whole time.
You wanted a train the whole time, but a train where you can have 6 seats all to yourself and, listen to your crappy, music and right. And then they'll say, when we'll be able to get twice as many cars through an intersection as we can right now, right? They do. This is what they're thinking, right? That's kind of why people, I think, you're getting on the one side, people are so excited because it's like we're finally going to be able to solve all these problems that have been impossible to crack. But the other thing you're hearing is also from urbanists and people who care about cities thinking, well, but if we could get to this future where, shared mobility or sort of the Uber and Lyft idea and driverless vehicles can rise together and we can crack that nut around the efficiency problem that we were talking about before. And then maybe I don't need all that room to store these dormant assets because they're constantly circulating in the city and they're picking up and they're dropping off, kind of like a bus, but more nimble, right? Because they're not fixed to a certain route. They can kind of move around. And when you look at the map of where Uber and Lyft have served in Los Angeles, even within just a year of launching, I mean, it's a spider web that stretches across the whole city. And you look at the map of our bus and our train system and it's static and it's
They're
fixed.
going places that weren't being served before.
And then you hear people talk about safety. If you're in something that literally will not allow you to be the cause of a crash, we can get to Vision Zero in, next year.
Vision Zero, that's the hope that we can eliminate traffic
deaths, right. So those two views on autonomous vehicles are directly opposed to one another. Right.
Yeah, there's the people who say it's all going to be about safety and equitability
and mobility
between
and
neighborhoods.
Affordability.
And then there's the people who are like, it's the same thing but twice as fast.
Right. That's right. And there are never any people in those simulations that you see of I'm watching them and I'm like, where are the? Oh,
God
wait,
damn
that
it.
little dot right there. I think that's a person. Oh no, it just got run over. That's not a person. I don't know what that is. It's just a ghost in the machine, right? So those two. That's what you're hearing is that from both sides of the transportation
everyone's
aisle,
projecting their fantasy onto it.
And it's tremendously attractive for that reason, right? And then you've got the folks who are sort of, over in the corner saying, bah, that's not going to happen. And, what's still going to matter about cities is that, you can bike and walk and blah, blah, blah. So you get the kind of,
I guess that's me.
The kind of the Luddites, that are sort of thinking about things. And I say that fondly because I myself consider the Shire my home and am totally skeptical of new technology also, Adam. So I'm right there with you.
I do.
I do. I have some digital hair. Anyway, so all of that is sort of inside the transportation realm. And then when you start talking to non-transportation people, they're like, oh, but it's like 50 years away, right? That's not happening tomorrow. And the fact of the matter is that there's a guy in California that built his own self-driving car with some software and some cameras in his garage last year.
Really?
So on the one hand, it seems far away. On the other hand, the people who should be thinking about this stuff are projecting a whole bunch of different futures on it. And then, on my third hand, there's, this stuff is actually really happening and it's being driven by folks who are not in any of those sectors. It's being driven by mostly auto manufacturers who are very concerned with the trend that people are not purchasing vehicles anymore, that people are not getting their driver's licenses, that, when you give teenagers and sort of younger folks a choice between a car and a smartphone, they pick the smartphone because that's their ticket to independence.
We talked to a fellow named Mike Berners-Lee who writes about carbon footprints and things like that for an episode that we're doing. And he talked about the thing with autonomous cars is they could be good or bad, because it could be a wonderful new transportation system that lowers everyone's carbon footprint, or you could have people saying, well, now I can live 2 hours outside of the city, get my autonomous car, there's a bed in the back, I'll sleep in it.
And a toilet.
Yeah, and a toilet.
There would need to be toilets for that future to happen.
Well, why not, right? And so now I can commute twice as far. Hey, it's an electric car. Well, it's if you're driving twice as far, you're not having any carbon benefit. And so that could happen. There could be an autonomous car future with more traffic, higher carbon footprints, maybe more deaths. That's less equitable, right? Yeah. And how do we avoid that future and get the one that we all prefer?
Well, I think first and foremost, cities have to set a vision, right? And they have to say, this is the outcome that we want, right? And it probably doesn't change that much from whatever the vision is that your city has for its transportation system right now.
Yeah.
Second, I think that cities are going to remain the success of a city and sort of, what we think of as in a sort of ambiguous way as a great city is still going to begin and end with the people and the public spaces that are in that city. And so keeping that as sort of the North Star of the focus of what we're after and what the outcomes are that we want. I want democratic public spaces. I want to see in everybody who lives in this city. I want to have those spontaneous interactions with them that might inspire me to go, write a screenplay or, go create some kind of a policy. All of those things that make cities great really start with our public spaces. And then safety, keeping a focus first and foremost on safe streets that are safest for the vulnerable user at the top of the transportation food chain. They're going to be safer for everybody else. And then finally, land use. Well, I guess equity is in there also. So making sure that those things we're making that investment and we're rethinking how we invest our public transit funds so that we offset the cost of those services so that they're available to everybody. But then land use and making sure that we have smart, urban growth boundaries and smart land use policies and smart affordable housing policies, so that we have the cities that we want and we learn our lesson from the tremendous sort of negative impacts of sprawl that we've experienced.
So here's what I want to know, and we've talked a lot about like the specific ways in which we hope our cities will be better and how we can move them there. Are people 100 years from now going to look at car culture in the United States and just be baffled that anybody thought that this was a good way to do it? Like they were individually piloting these combustion engines around and like they just accept. You know how when you like go look at when the Brooklyn Bridge was built, 300 people died, and we're like, we can't believe they were okay with 300 people dying, like building a bridge. And the number of deaths that we accept now as like, I don't know, was it 40,000 people a year die in traffic fatalities in the U.S., where it's just like, yeah, that's what we accept. We accept that 100 years from now, when we're all in our autonomous train pods, sleeping in the back, and there's zero emissions and et cetera. Is this going to look insane or?
Well, I think that the sort of transportation system of 100 years from now, I think will still, nothing that we can do, even building an internal combustion engine has been enough to take away that kind of fundamental evolutionary desire that we have to be around each other.
Yeah.
And so I think it's possible that we look back and we think, oh, that was just madness. What were we thinking? Because everybody thinks that
there was a place called Phoenix and it was horrible.
Because everybody thinks they're a great driver. You ask people, are you a good driver? Rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. People are like, I'm an 8, clearly.
And
I'm being modest. That's most people, Adam. Most people will tell you that. But we also know that almost all car crashes happen because of human error.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so
what other error are they happening because of? Earthquakes? Like, what else is going on other than people screwing up?
Right. And so this idea that somehow if we can finally take the human, maybe diminish their role in the equation, that people will finally be able to say, oh my word, look at how much safer everything is.
Yes.
And what were we thinking? I hope that we'll get to that place, and that we will, you will pay, some amount of money and, a month, and you'll be able to use a huge variety of transportation options. And maybe someday, some days you want to get in your robo-taxi, but then other days you want to ride your bike, or other days you want to walk, or other days you want to get on the subway, depending on where you need to go and why. And you just have this huge array of options, and you can make that decision when you're like in the moment you're walking out the door. You don't have to plan it all out and have like 20 different cards and like 16 different apps on your phone. It's all sort of made really simple.
You're like describing a fantasy to me. I'm like, it's like this is like erotic fiction for the transportation enthusiast in me. I'm like, oh God.
Yeah, it's good stuff, right?
And it also reminds me of, I don't know, I was in Tokyo like a couple months ago, and that's what it reminded me of, where it was like, I felt like if there was some place I needed to go, I just left my house and went there, and like I'll take a train. Oh, there's a train right there. Like it was just so, it was so seamless
so
in that way.
Easy. Didn't have to think about it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I think bike share works in a lot of cities. You don't have to think about it. You just go and you jump on a bike. You don't have to haul your bike up and down the stairs of the transit station, or, make sure that you have a pump on you because you might get a flat or a wrench or whatever. And you don't have to have a gigantic, 20-pound motorcycle lock so that your bike doesn't, all of those things to focus. And what that is a shift, a sort of a tectonic shift to focus on the user experience.
That's what you want in transportation. You want to like say, I want to get a cup of coffee, and then just go. It's almost like,
and everybody deserves that.
Yes.
Everybody should have that, not just the folks who have a lot of resources to be able to have that kind of experience now.
I'll leave it on that note. I think that's a wonderful place to leave it. Thank you for even just shooting for that, because that's so obviously so important.
Well, thanks for having me in.
All right, that was Adam Ruins Everything, the podcast, the inaugural episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We will be back in 2 weeks, so please tune in. New episode on June 8th. Our producer is Shara Morris, and our senior producer is Colin Anderson. Thanks also to John Wolfe and Sam Sparks and Jesse Thorne and Maximum Fun. If you like the show, please be sure to tell a friend and subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, your favorite podcast app, whatever it is. And don't forget to leave us a rating or comment wherever it is that you subscribe. And once again, lest you forget, Adam Ruins Everything, the TV show, is coming back August 23rd. That is our big premiere. You can also find clips and full episodes at truetv.com/Adam Ruins Everything and the Watch True TV app. And hey, if you enjoyed the show or you hated it and you want to tell me what you thought of it, please tweet at me at Adam Conover. I'd love to hear what you think, and we'll see you next time.
MaximumFun.org.
Comedy and culture. Artist owned.
Listener supported.